The arrivals board at San Francisco International Airport flickered and changed, and Alara watched her flight number turn from in air to landed with a strange sense of unreality. She had been traveling for 18 hours, her body trapped in a pressurized metal tube while her mind raced 5,000 miles ahead of her. But now that she was here, standing on American soil for the first time in her life, she felt something she hadn't expected at all. She felt nothing. Not the fireworks she'd imagined. Not the overwhelming rush of love she'd been promised in every movie she'd ever watched. Not even relief. Just the hollow hum of jet lag and the mechanical shuffle of hundreds of strangers moving toward baggage claim, toward waiting arms, toward the rest of their lives. And Kai wasn't there. She checked her phone for the 20th time. His last message had come in somewhere over the Atlantic, a simple string of words that she'd read so many times the screen had nearly memorized them. "I'll be there. Wait for me by the big windows." But the big windows were full of February grey, and the crowds parted and reformed like breathing, and Kai was nowhere in sight. She should have been scared. A young woman alone in a foreign country, the man she'd crossed an ocean for not appearing as promised. But Alara hadn't crossed an ocean to be scared. She'd crossed it because she believed, with every cell in her body, that love was the one thing worth being foolish for. 6 months earlier, she had been sitting in a cramped cafe in Bristol, England, rain streaking the windows like tears, when a man with kind eyes had asked if the seat across from her was taken. It was such an ordinary beginning that it almost felt embarrassing to remember. No thunderbolt. No slow-motion moment. Just a Tuesday afternoon and a man holding a coffee cup and waiting for an answer. She'd said no, it wasn't taken, and gone back to her book. He'd sat down, pulled out a sketchbook, and for 20 minutes they existed in parallel, strangers sharing the same small square of warmth against the cold. Then he'd leaned forward, and she'd looked up, and something had shifted. "I'm sorry to bother you," he'd said, and his voice was low and careful, like he measured each word before releasing it. "But I've been trying to draw that woman by the window for the last 10 minutes, and I can't seem to get the light right. Do you mind if I start over and include you instead?" She'd laughed. It was such an unusual request, such an oddly vulnerable thing for a stranger to admit. Most men would have pretended to be confident. He'd simply told her the truth. "I'm not very interesting to draw," she'd said. He'd looked at her then, really looked, in a way that made her feel seen rather than examined. "I think you might be wrong about that." His name was Kai Tanaka. He was an architect from California, traveling alone through Europe for 6 weeks, sketching buildings and drinking coffee and trying to understand why modern cities had forgotten how to make people feel something. He was 34, 7 years older than her, with quiet hands and a way of listening that made you want to keep talking just to hear the silence he gave back. They talked for 3 hours. When he finally left, he pressed a page torn from his sketchbook into her hands. It was her, caught in charcoal and shadow, her face half turned toward the window, rain blurred behind her like a second skin. At the bottom, he'd written a single line. "Some people wait a lifetime for a moment like this." She'd thought it was a line from a song. Later, she learned he'd written it himself. What followed was the kind of romance that made her friends roll their eyes and her mother wring her hands with worry. 3 days in Bristol, showing him the city she'd grown up in. A weekend in Bath, walking the Roman streets and pretending they were characters from a different century. A promise, whispered in a train station, that this wasn't the end. For 4 months, they lived across a screen. Video calls at odd hours, messages sent into the void hoping the other would wake to them. He told her about his work, his love of clean lines and open spaces, his complicated relationship with the family he'd left behind in California. She told him about her job at a small gallery, her dreams of curating something meaningful, her fear that she was the kind of person who waited for life to happen rather than making it happen herself. "You're not waiting," he said one night, his face soft in the glow of her laptop. "You're preparing. There's a difference." "And what am I preparing for?" He'd smile then, a slow thing that reached his eyes before his mouth. "Me. If you'll have me." It was insane. She knew it was insane. She had a life in Bristol, small but solid. Friends who knew her history, a job that paid the bills, a flat with a leaky radiator and a view of the cemetery that she'd grown weirdly fond of. To leave all of that for a man she'd known for 3 days in person and 4 months through a screen, it was the kind of decision people made in novels, not in real life. But when she closed her eyes and imagined her future, she saw clean lines and open spaces. She saw quiet hands and a voice that measured its words. She saw him. So she sold everything she couldn't carry. She quit her job. She hugged her mother at Heathrow Airport and pretended not to see the tears her mother was pretending not to shed. She boarded a plane, and she flew 5,000 miles toward a man who had promised to be waiting by the big windows. The crowds thinned. The arrivals board flicked again. Alara checked her phone, and this time there was a message. "I'm so sorry. Family emergency. I'll explain everything. Can you take a taxi? The address is on the fridge. Key is under the third plant pot on the left. I'll be home as soon as I can." She read it 3 times, trying to find the right way to feel. Disappointment was there, sharp and immediate. Worry followed close behind. What kind of emergency kept you from the airport when the person you loved was arriving from across the world? But underneath both of those, she found something else. Understanding. Because Kai had told her, in those long late-night conversations, that family was complicated. That he loved his mother and respected his father, but that love and respect came with rules he'd never quite learned to explain. He'd warned her, gently, that things might be different here. That she might find him changed. "I'm not the same person in California that I am when I'm traveling," he'd said. "I wish I was. But I'm working on it." She'd told him she understood. She'd told him she loved all the versions of him. She'd meant it then, and she meant it now. So she gathered her bags, found the taxi rank, and gave the driver an address she'd memorized weeks ago. The city blurred past her window, freeways and palm trees and strip malls and hills, and she pressed her face to the glass like a child, trying to absorb it all. This was her home now. These streets, this light, this man waiting for her somewhere beyond the curve of the road. The taxi pulled up to a modest house in a quiet suburb. Pale stucco, a small garden, a porch with 3 terracotta pots arranged just so. She paid the driver, dragged her bags to the door, and reached for the third pot on the left. The key was there, just as he'd promised. She let herself in. The house was silent. Not the comfortable silence of an empty space, but something denser, heavier. The kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something. She stood in the hallway, her bags at her feet, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant tick of a clock somewhere deeper in the house. On the kitchen counter, exactly where he'd said it would be, she found a note propped against a vase of white flowers. "Alara, I hate that I'm not there. I'll make it up to you. Make yourself at home. I'll be back as soon as I can. I love you. Wait for me. Kai." She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. She walked through the house slowly, letting her fingers trail across surfaces, trying to find him in the spaces he inhabited. A bookshelf full of architecture texts. A photograph of a younger Kai with an older couple she assumed were his parents. A small shrine in the corner of the living room, simple and elegant, with a photograph of an elderly woman and a bowl of oranges. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know what to do with any of it. So she sat on the edge of his bed, their bed, she corrected herself, and waited. The silence pressed in around her, thick and foreign, and for the first time since she'd boarded the plane in Bristol, Alara felt the full weight of what she'd done. She had traveled 5,000 miles for love. She had left behind everything she knew. And now she sat alone in a stranger's house, waiting for a man who hadn't been able to meet her at the airport. But she told herself this was just the beginning. The difficult part. The transition. Soon he would walk through the door, and his arms would close around her, and everything would make sense again. She closed her eyes and listened for the sound of his key in the lock. The silence listened back. The key turned in the lock 3 hours later. Alara had drifted in and out of an exhausted sleep on the bed, too wired to fully rest but too drained to stay properly awake. The sound jolted her upright, her heart suddenly racing, her mouth dry. She heard the front door open and close with careful softness. Footsteps in the hallway. A pause. Then his voice, barely above a whisper, "Alara." She was off the bed and moving before she could think, following the sound through the unfamiliar layout of the house, around a corner, into the kitchen where he stood. And there he was. Kai. Real and solid and finally here. For one perfect second, His face broke into the smile she remembered, the one that reached his eyes first, the one that had made her believe in strangers in a Bristol cafe. He opened his arms and she walked into them, pressing her face against his chest, breathing him in. He smelled different here, like cedar and something else she couldn't name. But his arms were the same, wrapped around her with that quiet strength she'd dreamed about for months. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to be there. I wanted to watch you walk off that plane." "It's okay," she said, because it had to be. Because they were together now, and that was what mattered. He pulled back slightly, his hands still on her shoulders, and looked at her like he was memorizing her all over again. "You're really here. I'm really here." And for a moment, it was exactly what she'd imagined. The reunion. The relief. The beginning of everything. Then a voice came from the hallway behind her, and the moment shattered. "Kai, you did not tell me she had arrived." Alara turned to find a woman standing in the kitchen doorway. Small and elegant, with steel-grey hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple black dress and an expression that revealed absolutely nothing at all. Kai's hands dropped from Alara's shoulders. His whole posture changed, shoulders squaring, chin lowering, eyes casting slightly downward. He looked younger suddenly. Smaller. "Mother," he said. "This is Alara. Alara, this is my mother, Sochiko." Sochiko inclined her head the barest fraction of an inch. Her eyes traveled over Alara slowly, from her rumpled travel clothes to her tired face to her uncombed hair. The assessment was silent and thorough and utterly unreadable. "You must be tired from your journey," Sochiko said. Not a question. An observation. Her English was precise, accented but perfect. "Kai, you should have told me. I would have prepared the guest room." The guest room. Alara felt the words land like small stones in her chest. She looked at Kai, waiting for him to correct his mother, to explain that she wasn't a guest, that she was here to stay, that she was family now. But Kai said nothing. He simply stood there, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the floor and the wall, and let the silence stretch. "I can show you to the room," Sochiko continued smoothly. "You will want to rest before dinner. We eat at 6. Very strictly at 6. It wasn't an invitation. It was an instruction. Alara opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything, to reclaim some ground, but Kai caught her eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. A warning. A plea. "Not now. Please." So she swallowed her words, picked up her bags, and followed Sochiko down the hall to a small room at the back of the house. It was tidy and impersonal, with a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out onto a perfectly manicured garden. Nothing of Kai in it. Nothing of anyone. "The bathroom is across the hall," Sochiko said from the doorway. "We rise at 6. Breakfast at 7. Please do not be late." And then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Alara alone with the silence and the growing weight of something she couldn't yet name. Dinner was an education in invisibility. Alara had dressed carefully, choosing a simple blouse and skirt, hoping to look respectful, presentable, worthy. She arrived at the dining room at exactly 6, as instructed. Kai was already there, seated at a low table alongside his father, a stooped man with kind eyes and a permanent air of apology about him. His name was Kenji, and he greeted Alara with a small bow and a murmured welcome that felt genuine if formal. Sochiko entered last, carrying dishes with precise, economical movements. She arranged them on the table with the focus of a surgeon, bowls of miso soup, plates of fish and vegetables, rice in a wooden container. Everything beautiful. Everything deliberate. Everything in its exact right place. They ate in near silence. Alara watched Kai, searching for the man she'd fallen in love with. He sat rigidly, using his chopsticks with mechanical precision, speaking only when spoken to. When Sochiko made a quiet comment about the fish being slightly overcooked, he simply nodded and continued eating. When Kenji attempted to ask Alara about her flight, Sochiko's glance silenced him mid-sentence. The words built up inside Alara like pressure in a pipe. She wanted to ask about the emergency that had kept Kai from the airport. She wanted to tell him about her journey, about the taxi ride through the city, about sitting alone in his house waiting for him. She wanted to reach across the table and touch his hand and feel connected to him again. But the silence in that room was a force of its own. It pressed down on conversation before it could form. It made every sound feel loud, the clink of chopsticks against bowls, the soft sip of tea, the distant hum of the refrigerator. To speak felt like breaking something sacred. So she didn't. After dinner, Sochiko cleared the dishes with the same quiet efficiency. Kai's father excused himself to the living room, where he sat before a television playing a show he didn't seem to watch. Kai touched Alara's elbow lightly and murmured, "Let's go for a walk." Outside, the night air was cool and soft. They walked down the quiet suburban street, past houses with warm windows and barking dogs, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Alara felt she could breathe. "What was that?" she asked finally. Kai was quiet for a long moment. "That was dinner." "You know what I mean." She stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. "Kai, your mother didn't even acknowledge that I'm here to stay. She put me in the guest room. She called it the guest room." "I know. And you just sat there. You didn't say anything." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. "What was I supposed to say?" "The truth? That I'm your fiancé? That I came here to build a life with you? That I'm not a guest?" "Alara." His voice was gentle but tired. "You don't understand. This is how it works. My mother, she's traditional. The family runs on certain rules, certain expectations. If I challenge her in front of you, if I make it seem like she's wrong, she'll shut down completely. You'll never reach her." "Then how do I reach her? How do I reach you?" He looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He looked torn, stretched between two worlds, two women, two versions of himself. "Give it time," he said. "Please. Just give it time. She'll come around. She just needs to see that you're serious, that you're willing to learn." "Learn what?" "Our ways. The way we do things." He took her hands in his. "I know it's hard. I know it's not what you imagined. But this is my family. This is where I come from. If we are going to build a life together, you have to understand them. And they have to understand you. That takes time." She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that love shouldn't require her to disappear, to mute herself, to become someone else at the dinner table. But she also saw how much this cost him. Saw the weight he carried between his roles as son and partner. Saw that he was trying, in his own way, to bridge a gap he'd been born into. "How long?" she asked. "I don't know. But I'm here. I'm with you. We'll figure it out together." He pulled her close, and she let him. She told herself that this was just the adjustment period. That every relationship had its challenges. That love meant meeting each other halfway, even when the halfway point felt like a foreign country. But as they walked back to the house, Tadaso still in his, she couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part wasn't the silence itself. It was watching Kai become someone else inside it. It was seeing the man who had sketched her in charcoal and written poetry in train stations fade into someone who couldn't meet his mother's eyes. Back inside, Sochiko was in the living room, folding laundry with precise, perfect movements. She looked up as they passed, her gaze landing on their joined hands. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Disapproval? Disappointment? Before it smoothed back into neutrality. "Kai," she said quietly, "the futon in the guest room needs another blanket. It will be cold tonight." "Not your room." "Not Alara's room." "The guest room." Kai nodded and released Alara's hand. "I'll get it." He disappeared down the hall, and Alara stood alone in the doorway, caught between the silence of the living room and the silence of everything else. Sochiko continued folding, her back straight, her movements unhurried. She didn't look at Alara again. Alara wanted to say something. Wanted to introduce herself properly, to explain who she was and why she was here, to bridge this impossible gap with words. But the silence felt like a wall, and she didn't know how to climb it. So she walked to the guest room, lay down on the narrow bed, and stared at the ceiling until Kai finally came in with an extra blanket. He placed it at the foot of the bed, then sat beside her, his hand on her arm. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know this is hard." "Just stay with me," she said. "That's all I need." He lay down beside her, and for a little while, in the darkness of the guest room, they were just two people again. Two people who loved each other, trying to find their way through. But in the morning, when she woke, he was gone. Already up. Already dressed. Already slipped back into the version of himself that belonged to this house, this family, this silence. And Alara lay alone in the narrow bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the house waking up around her, and wondered how long she could wait for him to find his way back. Alara tried. God, she tried. She woke at 6 each morning, before the sun fully cleared the horizon, and padded quietly to the kitchen to help with breakfast. Sachiko was always there before her, already moving through her rituals with the precision of a practiced dance. She didn't ask for help. She didn't refuse it either. She simply existed in her own sphere, leaving Alara to hover at the edges, unsure where to place herself. "Would you like me to cut the vegetables?" Alara asked one morning, her voice too loud in the quiet kitchen. Sachiko glanced at her, then at the knife in her own hand. "I have been cutting vegetables for 40 years. I do not need assistance." It wasn't cruel. It was simply factual. But the fact landed like a door closing. Alara learned to make herself small. She learned to sit at the dinner table with her hands in her lap, eating what was served, offering no opinions on the food or the weather or anything else. She learned to smile when Sachiko made comments that felt like criticisms wrapped in observations. In Japan, we would not wear shoes in the house after she'd walked 3 steps inside with them on. "The fish here is never as fresh as what we had in Kyoto," as she pushed it around her plate. She learned to wait for Kai. But Kai was a ghost in his own home. He left for work before she fully woke and returned long after dinner was cleared. In the evenings, he sat with his father in front of the television, speaking in low murmurs that Alara couldn't hear. When she joined them, the murmuring stopped. Not because they were excluding her, she told herself. Just because they were private people. Just because she was new. At night, they shared the guest room. Sachiko had still not referred to it as anything else, and Alara would curl against him in the darkness, trying to find the man she'd crossed an ocean for. "How was your day?" she'd whisper. "Fine," he'd whisper back. "Busy." "What did you do?" "Work. Meetings. The usual." The words were walls. She could feel them rising between them, brick by brick, night by night. She wanted to shake him, to demand that he come back to her, to remind him that he'd promised her a life, not this quiet coexistence. But she was learning to be silent too. Learning that speaking too loudly, wanting too much, feeling too deeply, these were failures here. These were the things that made Sachiko's lips press into a thin line and Kai's shoulders tense with invisible weight. So she swallowed her questions. She swallowed her loneliness. She swallowed herself, bite by bite, and tried to pretend the hunger wasn't killing her. The incident with the vase happened in the 6th week. It was a small thing. A nothing thing. A ceramic vase that sat on a low shelf in the living room, pale blue with a crack running through its center that had been repaired with gold lacquer. Kintsugi, Kai had explained once, the art of repairing broken things and making the cracks beautiful. Alara was dusting. Sachiko had not asked her to dust, but Alara was desperate to be useful, to find some role in this house that wasn't just the guest. She moved carefully around the living room, lifting objects, wiping surfaces, trying to be invisible and helpful at the same time. The vase was lighter than she expected. When she lifted it, it slipped. She caught it. Barely. Her fingers closed around it an inch from the floor, her heart slamming against her ribs. But in the catching, her elbow knocked a framed photograph from a shelf behind her. The glass cracked. Not shattered, just cracked, a spiderweb fracture spreading from one corner. She stood there, frozen, the vase clutched her chest, the photograph tilted against the shelf, the crack in the glass catching the light like an accusation. Sachiko appeared in the doorway. She didn't ask what happened. She simply walked to the shelf, righted the photograph, and ran her finger along the cracked glass. Her face revealed nothing. "I'm so sorry," Alara said. "I was dusting. It was an accident. I'll replace it. I'll." "It was my mother's," Sachiko said quietly. The photograph. She is gone now. The glass was original. The words landed like stones in still water. Alara felt the ripple spread outward, felt the weight of what she damaged, felt the impossibility of ever making it right. I'm sorry, she said again, because it was the only thing she had. Sachiko looked at her then. Really looked. And for a moment, Alara saw something beneath the surface of that careful face. Not anger, not even disappointment, but something worse. Exhaustion. The tiredness of a woman who had spent her life maintaining order, only to have it disrupted by someone who didn't understand the first thing about what order cost. Perhaps, Sachiko said slowly, it is better if you do not dust. She left. The silence she left behind was worse than any shouting. That night, Alara waited for Kai to come to her. She waited for him to find her in the guest room, to ask what happened, to hold her and tell her it didn't matter. She waited through dinner, where Sachiko said nothing about the incident and Kenji glanced at Alara with something that might have been sympathy. She waited through the evening, through the television, through the quiet good nights. Kai came to bed at midnight. She heard him undressing in the darkness, felt the mattress shift as he lay down. Kai, she whispered. I know about the photograph, he said. His voice was flat. Tired. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I know. A pause. She's upset. I know she is. I tried to apologize. I'll pay for the repair. I'll find a way to. It's not about the money. He turned toward her in the darkness, and she could just make out the shape of his face, the shadows where his eyes should be. It's about respect. About being careful with things that matter. I was trying to help. I was trying to. Her voice cracked. Kai, I'm drowning here. I'm trying so hard, and nothing I do is right. I don't know the rules. I don't know how to be what she wants. I don't even know what she wants. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was so soft she almost missed it. She wants you to stop trying so hard. The words hung between them. Alara felt them land in her chest, sharp and cold. Then what do I do? She asked. How do I exist in this house? How do I exist in your life? Just be here. Be patient. Stop trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove something. I'm trying to find my place. There's a difference. Is there? He rolled away from her, facing the wall. We should sleep. Tomorrow is early. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling the distance between them like a physical thing. 5,000 miles she'd traveled. 5,000 miles to lie next to a man who couldn't look at her, in a house where she wasn't welcome, in a life that felt like it was shrinking around her. The weeks that followed were worse. Alara stopped trying. She stopped offering to help in the kitchen. She stopped attempting conversation at dinner. She stopped expecting Kai to be the man she remembered. She became what the house demanded, quiet, small, invisible. But invisibility had its own costs. She started to forget things. Not important things. She remembered to be on time, to bow appropriately, to never wear shoes inside. She forgot herself. She forgot what it felt like to laugh without checking first if laughter was allowed. She forgot the sound of her own voice raised in excitement, in argument, in love. She caught her reflection in windows and didn't recognize the woman looking back, pale, muted, her eyes holding something that looked like waiting. One afternoon, when the house was empty, she found a box of Kai's old sketches in the closet. She sat on the floor and went through them slowly, buildings and streets and faces, all drawn with that careful hand she'd fallen in love with. At the bottom of the box, she found the sketch he'd made of her in Bristol. The one with the rain and the words at the bottom. Some people wait a lifetime for a moment like this. She held it in her hands and tried to remember who she'd been in that moment. The woman who'd laughed at a stranger's request. The woman who'd believed in love enough to cross an ocean. The woman who'd had a voice, an identity, a self. That woman felt like a stranger now. A ghost from a different life. She heard the front door open and quickly put the sketch back, closing the box, hiding the evidence of her longing. When Kai found her in the closet, she was sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at nothing. Alara. His voice was concerned. What are you doing? Just looking, she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Thin. Far away. Just remembering. He crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Remembering what? She looked at him then. Really looked. And she saw that he was tired too. That this life was costing him something as well. That he was trapped between worlds, between loyalties, between the son his mother demanded and the man he'd promised to be. I don't know anymore, she said. I don't know what I'm remembering. I don't know what's real. His hand tightened on her shoulder. You're real. We are real. Are we? She gestured vaguely at the house, at the silence pressing in around them. Because it doesn't feel real. It feels like I'm playing a part in someone else's story, and I don't know the lines. He pulled her close, and she let him. She let him hold her, let him murmur apologies and promises into her hair. But she didn't believe them anymore. She couldn't. Because every day in this house was proof that promises meant nothing against the weight of silence. That love wasn't enough to bridge a gap this wide. That she was disappearing, inch by inch, and no one was watching her go. That night, she dreamed of Bristol. Of rain against cafe windows and a stranger with kind eyes who'd asked to draw her. She dreamed of the woman she'd been, and when she woke in the narrow bed, with Kai already gone and the house already silent, she lay in the darkness and mourned her. The woman in the dream was dead now. Killed by silence. And Alara, the one who remained, didn't know if she could bring her back. Alara was already awake, as she always was now. Sleep had become a stranger, leaving her to wander the dark hours alone. She lay in the narrow bed, counting the cracks in the ceiling, when Kai's phone erupted on the nightstand. He grabbed it before the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. What? Slow down. What happened? A pause. Then he was moving, throwing off covers, reaching for clothes. I'm coming. Tell them I'm coming. Alara sat up, her heart already racing. What is it? My father. Kai's voice was tight, controlled in that way she'd learned meant he was falling apart inside. He collapsed. There at the hospital. She was out of bed before he finished the sentence, pulling on clothes, grabbing her shoes. I'm coming with you. He stopped, one hand on the doorframe, and looked at her. In the dim light from the hallway, his face was a landscape of fear and something else, something that looked like hesitation. Alara, maybe you should stay. My mother will be there, and... Your mother will be there, she repeated. And I will be there. For you. I'm not staying in this house alone while you're at the hospital. I'm not. Something shifted in his face. A crack in the wall he'd built between them. He nodded once, quickly, and reached for her hand. They drove through empty streets, the city sleeping around them, the hospital lights appearing in the distance like a beacon. Kai's hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Alara wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but the silence in the car was the same silence that lived in the house now, too heavy to break. At the hospital, they found Sachiko in a waiting room, sitting perfectly upright in an uncomfortable chair, her hands folded in her lap. She looked smaller than Alara had ever seen her. Not fragile. Sachiko would never be fragile, but diminished. The armor she wore every day had developed a crack. She looked up as they approached, and her eyes landed on Alara. For a moment, Alara braced for the usual dismissal, the silent assessment that made her feel like an intruder. But Sachiko simply said, "He asked for you." Kai knelt beside his mother's chair. What happened? What did the doctors say? A stroke. The word came out flat, clinical. They don't know the extent yet. He's stable, but he can't speak properly. The words come out wrong. Kai's hand found Alara's, squeezing hard. She squeezed back, pouring into that small pressure everything she couldn't say. They waited. Hours passed. Nurses came and went with updates that all sounded the same. Stable, resting, no change. Sachiko didn't move from her chair. Kai paced. Alara sat in the corner, watching them both, feeling the weight of her own helplessness. Then, just before dawn, A doctor appeared and said Kenji was asking for his family. One visitor at a time. Sochiko went first. She was gone 20 minutes. When she returned, her face was even more unreadable than usual, but her eyes were wet. She hadn't cried in front of them. Alara suspected she hadn't cried in front of anyone for decades. Kai went next. He kissed Alara's forehead before he left, a small gesture, but the first unguarded affection he'd shown her in weeks. She watched him walk down the hallway, through the double doors, and disappear. She sat alone with Sochiko in the waiting room. The silence between them was different now, less hostile, more empty. Two women waiting for the same man to come back. "He asked for you," Sochiko said suddenly. Alara looked up. "What?" "When I went in. He asked for you." His words were wrong. But I understood. He wanted you to come next. Alara didn't know what to say. She'd barely spoken to Kenji. In all the weeks she'd lived in his house, they'd exchanged perhaps 100 words total. He was a quiet presence in the background, a ghost in his own home, always watching, never interfering. "He sees you," Sochiko continued, her voice low. "My husband sees things that others miss. He always has. It is why I married him." A pause. "It is also why I have stayed married to him." Before Alara could respond, the doors opened and Kai emerged. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed. He walked straight to Alara and took her hands. "He wants to see you," he said. "He's having trouble speaking, but he keeps saying your name. Or trying to." Alara stood, her heart pounding. She looked at Sochiko, who gave the smallest nod, permission, or perhaps just acknowledgement. Then she followed Kai through the double doors, down a brightly lit hallway, into a room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Kenji lay in the bed, small against the white sheets, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping their quiet witness. His eyes were open, and when he saw Alara, they widened slightly. His hand lifted from the blanket, reaching toward her. She crossed the room and took it. His skin was papery, his grip weaker than she expected. "Hello," she said softly. "I'm here." Kenji's mouth moved. Sounds came out, but they weren't words, slurred fragments, pieces of language that wouldn't assemble. Frustration crossed his face, and he tried again, harder this time, his grip tightening on her hand. And then, suddenly, clearly, one word emerged from the chaos. "Margaret." Alara froze. Kenji looked at her, but not at her. Through her. Past her. His eyes were focused on something only he could see, someone only he remembered. "Margaret," he said again, and this time it was softer, sadder. "You came back." Kai stepped forward. "Dad, this is Alara. Remember. Kai's Alara." But Kenji didn't seem to hear. He was still looking at Alara with those eyes that saw someone else, someone from a long time ago. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have spoken. I should have. I let the silence. She left because I never learned." His voice trailed off into sounds that weren't words. But Alara didn't need words anymore. She understood. She looked at Kai, who stood frozen by the door, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Then back at Kenji, whose eyes were still fixed on her with that desperate, pleading look. "Who is Margaret?" Alara asked quietly. Kenji's hand tightened on hers. His mouth worked, fighting against the damage in his brain, fighting to be understood. "My wife," he said. "First wife. Before Sochiko. American. She loved to laugh." The room tilted. Alara felt it happen, the ground shifting beneath her, the past reaching forward to touch the present. She looked at Kai, whose face had gone completely white. "I didn't know," he said. "I never knew." Nobody knew. Kenji's words were coming easier now, as if the act of speaking the secret had opened something inside him. "We met when I was young, studying in California. She was everything. Bright. Loud. She laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny." A tear escaped from the corner of his eye, tracing a path down his temple. "I brought her home. To my family. They didn't understand her. They didn't try. And I I let them. I let the silence speak for me. I thought if I just gave it time, she would learn. She would adapt. She would become what they needed. He stopped, his chest heaving with the effort of the story. She tried. God, she tried. For 2 years, she tried. But every day, the silence took a little piece of her. Until one morning, I woke up and she was gone. Just a note. 3 words. I can't breathe. Alara felt tears on her own face. She didn't know when they'd started. I never went after her, Kenji whispered. I was too afraid. Too proud. Too trapped in what I was supposed to be. I married Sochiko 6 months later. A good Japanese woman. A proper wife. And I spent 30 years pretending I didn't dream about Margaret's laugh every single night. His eyes focused suddenly, sharply, on Alara's face. For a moment, he was fully present, not confused, not lost in the past, but completely, painfully aware. You look like her, he said. Not your face. Your eyes. The way you hold yourself when you're trying not to disappear. His grip on her hand became urgent. Don't stay. If he won't speak for you, don't stay. It doesn't get better. The silence only grows. It eats everything. Dad. Kai's voice was broken. Dad, stop. But Kenji wasn't finished. He looked past Alara now, at his son standing in the doorway. You learned from me, he said. The silence. The fear. I taught you without meaning to. I showed you how to love someone from a distance, how to let tradition be your excuse for not fighting. His voice cracked. I made you into me. And I am so sorry. Kai didn't move. He stood there, pinned by his father's words, by a truth he'd never known, by the revelation that the distance between him and Alara wasn't just cultural, it was inherited. A wound passed down through blood and silence, generation to generation. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I'm sorry, but the patient needs to rest. You'll have to come back later. Alara released Kenji's hand. He caught her wrist, held her for one more moment. Margaret, he whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, Alara said softly. I know. She walked past Kai, through the doorway, down the hall. She didn't wait for him. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to understand that the ghost she'd been fighting wasn't just his mother's expectations or his culture's rules. It was his father's regret. It was 30 years of silence. It was a woman named Margaret who had loved to laugh, and who had disappeared because no one in this family had ever learned to speak loud enough to keep her. In the waiting room, Sochiko looked up as Alara entered. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Alara saw something other than judgment in that careful face. She saw recognition. She saw a woman who had spent 30 years married to a man who loved someone else's ghost. She saw another prisoner of the same silence. Alara sat down across from her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. But this time, the silence felt different. This time, it wasn't a wall. It was a question. And Alara was finally ready to answer it. Dawn broke over the hospital parking lot, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt almost offensive in their beauty. Alara stood by the entrance, watching the light spread, feeling the weight of everything she'd learned settle into her bones. Kai found her there 20 minutes later. He looked hollowed out, his eyes red, his shoulders curved inward like he was bracing against a blow. We need to talk, he said. Yes. We do. They walked to a small garden area near the hospital entrance, a careful arrangement of benches and drought-resistant plants that tried too hard to be peaceful. They sat on opposite ends of a wooden bench, the space between them filled with everything unspoken. I didn't know, Kai began. About my father. About Margaret. I swear to you, I had no idea. I believe you. He married my mother 6 months later. They've been together for 30 years. How do you hide something like that for 30 years? Alara looked at him. Really looked. At the man she'd crossed an ocean for, the man who had sketched her in charcoal and written poetry in train stations, the man who disappeared every night into a silence he'd learned from his father. The same way you hide everything else, she said quietly. By never speaking. By letting the silence do the talking. Kai flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? She turned to face him fully. Kai, I've been in your house for months. I've watched you become someone I don't recognize. I've sat at that dinner table night after night, disappearing piece by piece, and you've watched it happen. You've seen me drowning, and you've done nothing. I was trying to protect you. To protect us. My mother. Your mother is not the problem. Alara's voice was firm now, steady in a way it hadn't been in weeks. She's a woman who spent her entire life maintaining order because she married a man who was in love with someone else's ghost. She's not my enemy. She's not even yours. She's just another person trapped in this house of silence you all built. Kai stared at her. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand more than you think. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the sketch from Bristol, the one she'd found in the box, the one she'd carried with her every day since. She unfolded it and held it out to him. He looked at it. At her face, caught in charcoal and rain. At the words at the bottom. Some people wait a lifetime for a moment like this. I found this in your closet, she said. I've been carrying it around like a talisman, trying to remember who I was when you drew it. Trying to remember who you were. She watched his face as he looked at the drawing. Watched something crack open behind his eyes. That woman, she continued. She believed in love. She believed in you. She got on a plane and flew 5,000 miles because she thought you were worth it. And maybe you are. But the man she fell in love with, the man who drew this, he spoke. He took risks. He looked at a stranger in a cafe and told her she was worth drawing. I'm still that man. Are you? She took the sketch back, folding it carefully, tucking it away. Because that man wouldn't have let me sit alone in a stranger's house for 3 hours on my first day in a new country. That man wouldn't have watched me shrink and shrink and shrink and never once asked if I was okay. That man wouldn't have let his silence eat me alive. Kai's hands were shaking. I didn't know how to be different. I didn't know how to fight them. You didn't have to fight them. You just had to fight for me. Her voice cracked, finally, after holding steady for so long. That's all I needed, Kai. Just one sign that I mattered more than the rules. One moment where you chose me over the silence. I choose you now. Now. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now, after your father lies in a hospital bed and tells me I look like the woman he lost 30 years ago. Now, after I've spent months disappearing? Now you choose me. I didn't know. I didn't see. No, you didn't. She stood up, needing to move, needing to escape the weight of his words. You didn't see because you weren't looking. You were so busy being the perfect son, the obedient husband-to-be, that you forgot to be my partner. You forgot that love is a verb. It's not something you feel. It's something you do. He stood too, reaching for her. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. I can't tell you that. She stepped back, out of his reach. That's the point, Kai. I've been telling you for months. Every night when I asked how your day was and you said fine. Every morning when I woke up alone. Every dinner where I sat in silence while you pretended not to notice. I've been telling you. You just weren't listening. The silence stretched between them. Different now. Not the heavy silence of the house, but something more fragile. The silence of a held breath, waiting to see what happened next. I'm not Margaret, Alara said finally. I'm not going to disappear in the night with a 3-word note. I'm not going to let the silence kill me without a fight. Relief flickered across Kai's face. So you'll stay. That's not what I said. She met his eyes, held them. I'll stay if you fight. Not against your mother. Not against your culture. Against the silence. Against the thing in you that learned from your father that love means watching someone fade without speaking. I'll stay if you promise me that you'll learn to speak. Really speak. Even when it's hard. Even when it costs you something. Kai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know if I know how. Then learn. She stepped closer, close enough to touch him, But she didn't. Your father had 30 years to learn. He wasted them. Don't be him, Kai. Be the man who drew me in that cafe. Be the man who wasn't afraid to want something. They drove back to the house in silence, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of two people sitting with everything that had been said, letting it settle. Sochiko was in the kitchen when they arrived. She stood at the counter, preparing vegetables with those precise, economical movements, as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. As if her husband hadn't confessed to loving another woman for 30 years. She looked up as they entered. Her eyes moved from Kai to Alara, assessing, reading. Then she went back to her vegetables. The hospital called, she said quietly. Your father is resting. They think he will recover most of his speech. The damage was not as severe as they feared. Kai nodded. That's good. Yes. The silence returned. Alara stood in the doorway, watching them both, feeling the weight of everything that still needed to be said. She thought about leaving, about walking out the door and never coming back, about saving herself before the silence could finish its work. But she also thought about Margaret, about a woman who had loved to laugh, who had tried for 2 years, who had left a note and disappeared. Margaret had done what she needed to survive. Alara couldn't judge her for that. But Alara wasn't Margaret. She needed to know, before she made her choice, whether Kai was capable of being different from his father. Dinner that night was the same as always. Same table. Same food. Same careful arrangement of dishes. Sochiko sat at one end, Kenji's empty chair beside her. Kai sat across from Alara, and for the first time in months, he looked at her while they ate. Really looked. Not through her, not past her. At her. The meal progressed in silence, as it always did. Alara ate without tasting, waiting, watching. Sochiko's movements were as precise as ever, but there was something different in her face. A softness around the eyes. A crack in the armor. Then Sochiko spoke. The fish is dry. It was such a normal comment, such a typical observation, that Alara almost missed its significance. Sochiko criticized the food at every meal. It was part of the ritual. But this time, Kai looked up. This time, he met his mother's eyes. This time, he spoke. I think it's perfect. The words landed in the silence like stones in still water. Sochiko's chopsticks paused mid-air. Her eyes widened slightly, the first real surprise Alara had ever seen on that careful face. What did you say? Kai didn't look away. I said I think it's perfect. Alara helped you prepare it this morning. She woke up early to learn. She did her best. And I think it's perfect. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Alara had experienced in this house. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't oppressive. It was alive. Electric. Full of possibility. Sochiko set down her chopsticks. She looked at her son for a long moment, then at Alara. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were something else entirely. Something that looked almost like respect. Perhaps, Sochiko said slowly, you were right. She picked up her chopsticks and continued eating. The silence returned, but it was different now. Softer. A silence that allowed room for breath. Under the table, Kai's hand found Alara's. He squeezed once, gently. She squeezed back. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a happily ever after. It was one sentence. One small crack in a wall that had been built over generations. One moment of speaking when silence was expected. But it was a beginning. And as Alara sat at that table, in that house that had tried so hard to swallow her, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not happiness exactly. Not relief. Something quieter and more precious. Hope. The hope that love could learn to speak. That silence could be broken. That 5,000 miles and a lifetime of tradition didn't have to mean the end of her voice. Outside, the sun was setting over California, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, a family sat together at a table, learning for the first time what it meant to really be heard. It would take time. It would take work. There would be setbacks and silences and days when speaking felt impossible. But for now, this was enough. One sentence. one crack in the wall, one beginning.